Hi, good morning, everyone. On behalf of ORF, it's my pleasure to welcome you all to our special book discussion today. In next 1 hour, we will be engaging ourselves to discuss various aspects of a very interesting and insightful book entitled Kathmandu Dilemma, Resettling India-Nepal Ties, written by Ambassador Ranjit Rai, who needs no introduction. However, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce Ambassador Rai formally for our audience. Ambassador Rai is an Indian diplomat with over 30 years of experience in the Indian Foreign Service, including participation in the complex negotiations both at bilateral and multilateral levels, and extensive work in conflict areas and crisis situations. Mr. Rai has served as ambassador of India to Hungary, Vietnam, and Nepal. As a Joint Secretary North in the Ministry of External Affairs, he was closely associated with the development of the 12-point agreement signed in 2005 in New Delhi between the seven-party alliance of Nepal and the CPN Maoist. The pact initiated the peace process in Nepal. As an Indian ambassador to Nepal, he has revitalized the bilateral relationship between these two immediate neighbors and actively worked on the implementation of the comprehensive peace agreement with Nepali political leaders and other stakeholders. So welcome Ambassador Rai to this program. Well, our discussion will be divided into two parts. In the first part, we would like to have Ambassador Rai's views on various ups and downs in India-Nepal relations. And it will be followed by a panel discussion where our distinguished panelists will share their views on the book as well as their understandings on the contemporary relations between the two immediate neighbors. For this panel discussion, we have with us today Dr. S Radhakrishnan, Center Head, Neighborhood Studies, Vivekananda Foundation, New Delhi; Dr. Pramod Jaiswal, Research Director, Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, Kathmandu; and Aditya Shivamurthy, Research Assistant, ORF. Well, let me begin this discussion with some words on these very interesting book. Comprising 10 chapters, this book portrays how the first 2 decades of the new millennium have witnessed a dramatic socio-political transformation of Nepal, cutting across a phase of violent Maoist insurgency, end of monarchy, and establishment of a secular federal democratic republic. Nevertheless, political stability and a peace dividend have both remained elusive for Nepal. Nepal is also grappling with changing geopolitics, including the US-China contestation for the influence, and also the uneasy relationship between India and China. As a close neighbor, India has been deeply associated with the seminal changes in Nepal, and partly as a memoir, this book examines India's perspective on these developments in the context of civilisational, which Ambassador Rai has termed as Roti Beti Ka Rishta, and economic underpinnings of India-Nepal relationship, as well as some issues that continue to prevent this relationship from exploring its full potential. So this book is divided into two specific parts. In the first part, it talks about the trajectories of bilateral relationship between these two immediate neighbors with some twists and turns. And the second part deals with the future ways of conflict resolution. Well, having read your book, Ambassador Rai, I have a few questions in my mind, which I think may be the starting point of our discussion. Firstly, in your book, you have explicitly talked about a necessity to revisit the 1950 treaty on the point of amendments or changes. As we all know that India has a similar kind of friendship treaty signed in 1949 with Bhutan, which was revisited in 2007. So my question to you is why this sort of understanding has not yet been taken place between Nepal and India. So floor will be yours, Ambassador Rai, for next 10 to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. It's a very complicated issue. Of course, the Nepalese perspective is that this treaty is unequal, and they say it was not even signed between two equal partners. In India, it was the ambassador there at the time, and from Nepal, it was the prime minister. But more than that, the treaty represents a compact, and it has two basic dimensions. One is the security aspect, which for India is important, and the other is the economic or the developmental dimension, which for Nepal is very important. And, Nepal benefits through national treatment of its citizens in India. And while technically the treaty is reciprocal, we have never insisted on, Nepal giving, the same kind of treatment to Indians in Nepal. So this broadly was the compact. And this was signed in 1950. Now, the Nepalese say that the geopolitical situation in 1950 is very different from the geopolitical situation today. And we need to take into account all these factors. And, I think there is a point in this. After all, we are also arguing in the United Nations that India should be, given a permanent membership of the UN Security Council, because the world of today is very different from 1945 when the United Nations was set up. So there is a certain logic to this. But, what I would like to say is that this basic security compact has to be addressed. After all, in any treaty, the interests of both sides have to be taken into consideration. If the treaty only benefits one side, then why will the second side sign the treaty? So I think, that is very important. And I personally feel that we should be able to arrive at something that is acceptable to the two countries. This discussion has been going on for several decades, in fits and starts. Sometimes the issue becomes very sensitive in Nepal, there's a lot of activity, then things suddenly settle down, nothing much happens. Of course, Nepal itself has gone through a lot of turmoil in the last, 3 decades. But I do feel that, this has become an irritant in the relationship, and we need to seriously see how we can, remove this irritant and arrive at something that is mutually acceptable. And, we've tried various mechanisms. There was an eminent persons group that had been established earlier on this matter. I don't really know what the recommendations are. It's not in the public domain, but I understand some issues relating to the treaty were discussed. But for various reasons, this report has not been accepted. So I really think, the existing mechanism at the foreign secretary level, government-to-government mechanism should really go into this issue, because leaving it unresolved is just going to create unnecessary, tension. And, when you can resolve a thing, you have referred to the Bhutan precedent. I know my Nepali friends don't like reference to any Bhutanese precedent. But, we have resolved the 1949 treaty issue with Bhutan, and there's no reason why, we can't resolve it with Nepal. And as far as India is concerned, our Prime Minister has stated very clearly that we are prepared to, look at the changes that Nepal wants to bring. If Nepal wants to abrogate the treaty, we are prepared to look at it. If you want to amend it, modify it, change it, we're prepared to look at it. So I think the time has now come, for a serious discussion at governmental level on how to review this treaty.
Race directly linked up with the perception. The book has started with a very interesting chapter entitled "Why Don't They Like Us? Identity, Nationalism, and Mutual Perceptions." In this chapter, you have stated, in fact, let me quote you: "My own sense is the strong anti-Indian nationalist sentiment is also due to the historical fact of India having been associated with most of the political changes in Nepal, whether it was in anti-Rana movement, Jan Andolan, or resolution of Maoist insurgency and so on. Well, in this context, let me ask you, do you think that this kind of perception or misperception which is prevailing between both of us is actually responsible for not getting over this dilemma regarding this treaty? This is number one. And also, why do you think that this kind of perception is prevailing in India, in Nepal, that in anti-India sentiment? And do you think that this perception varies from core to periphery? In your chapter, you have mostly dealt with the perception of New Delhi and Kathmandu, and as we all know that in foreign policy foreign policy making, it is also imperative to consider the perceptions of peripheries. So the next discussion will be on perception from your end. Ambassador Rai.
Yeah, thank you. Perceptions depend on so many factors. I mean, if you're sitting in Nepal, look at the geography. On three sides, you're surrounded by India. Your access to the outside world is through India. And, behind you in the north are the big Himalaya mountains. So, a certain kind of mentality develops within the elites in Nepal. Look at our cultural and civilisational links. So Nepal is a sovereign, independent country. But, if everything is the same culturally, linguistically, in terms of religions with India, then what is it that makes Nepal a unique nation state? So you have to understand this, deep desire on the part of Nepal that, to affirm constantly that Buddha was born in Nepal or that Mount Everest is in Nepal. These are the markers which define their national identity. And, so these become very sensitive issues. But the main issue for anti-Indian nationalism really started with the abolition of multi-party democracy by King Mahendra in 1960. And, the government of India at the time was quite critical of this move and also called this a coup. And so, King Mahendra responded to India's criticism in various ways. The democratic parties in Nepal were naturally totally opposed to this move. And many of the leaders of these parties, especially of the Nepali Congress, came into India, fled into India in exile. And they were based here. So the, Nepalese King Mahendra did not like this. And he said India is supporting these anti-national elements. And India is against Nepal. So, the king basically tried to, gather the elite hill sentiment in his favor, saying that, look, he's doing this to protect Nepal's sovereignty and integrity, and these are traitors who are sitting in India, and India is supporting them, so India is against us. So that was really the beginning of this anti-Indian nationalism. And of course, the king also supported the leftist parties. Certain elements of the communist forces in Nepal were co-opted into the panchayat system, partyless panchayat system that King Mahendra introduced. So there was actually a common ground between the monarchy and the leftist forces in the 1960s against anti-Indian nationalism. And there are certain other factors, certain other things that, the king also did. So this is the genesis of this anti-Indian nationalism, and this, of course, has survived and thrived in Nepal because the communist movement in Nepal has been quite strong. Initially it was the UML type of parties, then they were joined later on by the Maoists. So the communists are a pretty dominant presence in the Nepali political system. And, this whole idea of anti-Indian nationalism is related more to the communists and of course the royalists, the monarchists. And we've seen this time and again, most recently in 2015 after Prime Minister Oli took over and forged a coalition with the royalist forces in Nepal. Now on this center periphery thing, I agree with you that the relationship between India and Nepal is much more between Kathmandu and Delhi. The strength of the India-Nepal relationship is really the people-to-people relationship, and especially since we have open borders. And I have clarified in my book that, when I talk about this anti-India sentiment, it is really prevalent among certain elite communities in the Kathmandu Valley, which is the political capital of Nepal and has an overwhelming influence, on decision-making within Nepal. I think if you move away from the Kathmandu Valley, you will see this sentiment gradually gets diluted till if you come to the border regions of Nepal with India, and I'm not only referring to the Tarai, but the regions bordering Uttarakhand, the regions bordering Sikkim, Darjeeling, and so on. The relationship is extremely cordial. But I have given us a cautionary note in the book where I've said, that Nepal is a very youthful country, and we have to be very careful about what the young people are thinking, and if the sentiment sort of grows amongst the young people of Nepal, we will have difficulties later on. And of course, the India-China relationship, the sensitivity of the India-China relationship obviously has an impact in terms of, what is happening in Nepal. And, this whole boundary issue has created a negative sentiment in India vis-a-vis Nepal. And, there is a perception that, Nepal is, quite closely aligned to its northern neighbor at a time when India-China relationship is so delicate and fraught. So, these are issues, but, these are issues that we have to keep engaging with each other in order to resolve them. We can't brush these under the carpet. These are the issues that, exist in the relationship. These are the perceptions. And clearly, we must work very hard to remove misperceptions, and to create a relationship that is based more on mutual trust rather than suspicion.
Right. Now, let me engage our panelists for further discussion. So I would like to request Dr. Sriradha Datto to share her views on the book as well as on contemporary relations on this bilateral relationship between these two immediate neighbors. Over to you, Sriradha. Please confine within, in the first round, within 7 to 8 minutes so that we can have more discussion.
Yes, of course. Thank you, Anusha. I'm so happy to be here. This is one of those books that I really read at one go, and thank you, Ambassador Ray, for writing this. It really held my trail of thoughts, and quite uncannily, I think, would respond to many of the queries that keeps rising when you turn a page of such a kind of a book. And I think which you just discussed this point, which Ambassador begins the book with. The most obvious question is, why don't they like us? I mean, a point that he said Prime Minister Modi asked him. I think we are all aware of the fact that Nepal likes almost everything about India, but not the Indians. I mean, every part of their life is so much integrated with India. I mean, on a day-to-day basis, the kind of open door policy and the relationship with we have across board. I mean, so but when it comes to that individual Indian, we've seen so much of angst. So it's a question that invariably, some of us who are interested in the neighborhood, it keeps coming up our minds. And I think in this book, I mean, the kind of details that he's done is, explains this whole situation. In fact, even this discussion we've just heard, I think for me, this really is one of the most, I would say, illuminating writing on contemporary, writing on the issue. So I think a point I would like to reiterate here is that, and which I can't say enough, and I think Anusha knows this side of me, that I like the reader-friendly narration, which is so removed from the typical dense academic style many of us tend to fall back on. And I think for me, this book is special because it really, the personal nuggets he brings in. And I particularly like the kind of facets he brings out about, the leaders like Oli and Prachanda. I mean, this is not possible by no matter what amount of heavy duty academic reading we do. So I really, really enjoyed it. And I think this really also sets apart this book from, many of the writings that we keep reading on contemporary subject. Because I think while of course the book looks at the big picture, in terms of the history, the cultural connect, economic potential, and a whole gamut of issues which has been dealt with, including the Maoist, and I think that is one really brilliant section, and the water problem and issues like that. I think, and what we've just heard about the time to revise the historical treaties. It's, I think, something that and I hope, I mean, it's not just not people like us, but even at the policy level and elsewhere, these would help us rethink and reset many of the ideas. And uh, I think what core to understanding a neighbor and Nepal here is what Ambassador Ray, draws our attention again to the fact that while for India, the officials or otherwise, Nepal is one another neighbor, a close neighbor, undoubtedly, with many layered ties. But for Nepal, India is, so much more encompassing. I mean, everything about India is, very closely watched in Nepal, which is something, of course, we see in the neighborhood with our neighbors too. But and it's this disconnect that the Nepal has with India, because Nepal feels that they're not being given the same attention by India. I think that's somehow the underlying issue that many conversations that we've had with our friends in Nepal comes that we are giving so much of time and attention, while India, obviously for obvious reasons, is not able to. And I think that constantly is something that every policymaker in India and elsewhere and Nepal is grappling with. And of course, I think a point which comes out so clearly is that. All these domestic developments that take place in Nepal has a constant reference to India. I mean, one would think that it's only when your neighbors, there's certain distinct foreign policies or certain other economic policies which would kind of have interdependence. But here we see it's not really so. So the kind of preoccupation that Nepal has about India is certainly cannot be matched. And I think that kind of underlines the entire narration. And I enjoyed this point that Ambassador Ray made about how posting in Nepal is always so complex and challenging. I think he writes enriching and rewarding, and I think it pretty much captures how every, I think, diplomat would have probably viewed, would have viewed their tenure like this. And the way, I mean, whatever the book brings to me on the table, I think it's continue to be go like that. I mean, I don't think it's we be able to kind of piece it as yet. I mean, it's really, really still complex. The layers are getting multi-layered from, especially from the last chapter, the last two chapters that he's written. I think I get a sense that there's a more, how would I say, more complexities being added to that already rather, mosaic which exists. I what one particular aspect that I really again caught my attention was how Ambassador Ray talks about how it's the foreign investments, the investors who are actually looking how India is working with Nepal. I mean, that kind of the fact that there's so much of potential we keep discussing and we keep hearing has not materialized simply also because I think every foreign investor is kind of wary about the fact that if India as a neighbor who's investing elsewhere all across the world is not able to do or is not doing in India, what is it that's holding back? And I really hope that every reader in Nepal, sees this point and sees how it's actually affecting that. And I think the point we've just discussed again between Anusha and Ambassador Ray is this, the trust issue. I think it's a recurring theme, and whether it's the EPG report, whether it's a treaty revision, I think the point here again, Ambassador makes about how they've never asked for abrogation. It's cherry picking that they do, but again, what leaders do and what the message that goes across the popular domain is so different. And this is something, I mean, I do appreciate and understand that it's really the valley, Kathmandu, who has this anti-India, narrative. But I would also say, and as a tourist, I've actually been all across Nepal, and I do that quite often. There are many apprehensions, even people away from the valley have about India. They may not be so virulent about the anti-Indianism, but I mean, I think the apprehensions that Nepal has is very much obvious, and somehow I think we not able to understand where that fear comes from. I mean, we think sitting in Delhi or elsewhere that we're doing it right. We are trying to help them as much as we can. Economically, the kind of support we've lent them for years is something that it comes naturally to us. But despite that, why is Nepal so apprehensive? And I think a case in point is this hydropower projects. I mean, we all know every hydrographer, every economist have talked about the potential, but the fact that Nepal is constantly held back, and is, I mean, they of course, it's basically emanates from a lack of trust, that they don't think India would do it right. And in this context, and I think Ambassador refers to this as a saga of missed opportunities, which is really so. But and I think again a point he makes here, that we need to move away from the bilateral narrative, and I've seen this also in the neighborhood elsewhere, that. I think every neighbor is now kind of more comfortable trying to. I mean, they've always been in the past, but India was always holding back about working beyond the bilateral approach. And I think here, and I know that there's been discussion with Bangladesh and others about how trilateral approach would be the way to break the impasse. And I think hydro. I mean, we keep showcasing this thing that we've done with Bhutan, which again, as you said, they don't take it too kindly. But the point is that we need to break this impasse, and I guess Ambassador Ray is probably in the best position amongst all of us to really say, how do we break that? How do we make them, understand that India is not here to shortchange you? I mean, essentially, that's the thing, that we will do it right. And I mean, I was just looking, I mean, reading and thinking in my head that suppose India was to even sit them down and let's say, okay, let's deal with the fears. Let's tell me what is it that is, but it's holding you back. What are your fears? Let me address some of the point. But we've seen this in the last 2 3 decades in Nepal, the swift landscape change that takes place, the political landscape. I mean, you don't know who you're talking to. I mean, one would think that in a stability, in a political stability, where there are periodic elections, that you're talking to one particular group, and that's been understood, and that message is being conveyed. But I think what has happened in Nepal, because of the changes that they faced in the last couple of decades, that there's no single group of voices who's kind of responsible, or in terms of accountable in holding policies or taking that forward. And I think that's probably a reason why India's had difficulty in addressing many of these bilateral issues, and they continue to fester. And I mean, we also clearly understand that
Let me
uh,
Thanks, Rita. Sorry to interrupt you. We will get back to you again.
all right.
So now I'll request Dr. Jaiswal to share your views, because Shrirada also has raised a couple of issues. I'm sure you have your own, own views on that. So it's over to you, Pramod.
Uh, thank you so much. First of all, I must thank Mr. Ranjit Rai for a wonderful book. Recently, what I've observed is that Indian scholar and policymakers have become diplomats, and diplomats have become scholars. It is so good to see wonderful books from Indian diplomats such as Ambassador Menon, Ambassador Nirupama Roy, Ambassador Arvind Gupta, Gokhale, and of course Shyam Saran. On the contrary, scholars are cautious and are not willing to speak, make excuses that they will not have permission from XYZ. So here I'm very delighted. What I'll do is I'll share my observation of the book, which I really enjoyed, and it was wonderful during these festive times. It was in addition to our festival. In the beginning of the book, the author states that the book is not scholarly, but it is far more scholarly than many scholars who would have contributed to Nepal-India relations. In 250 pages, he has beautifully covered Nepal's history, Nepal's geography, Nepal-India relations, and the China factor. And the book starts with a very interesting and important question of the day, which the Indian Prime Minister has asked the author in the book: Why don't they like us? Which means, why don't Nepal like India? I think it's the most important question, and this is from where Indian scholars, thinkers, and policymakers should start their study if they wish to explore the problems in the relations between the two countries. Why do Nepal do not like India, in spite of deep social, cultural, economic, historical ties? In spite of such a huge Indian contribution to Nepal's development, in spite of special relations, in spite of deep ties between army chief, in spite of family-to-family ties, almost in half of Nepal's home may have one or more people who have either studied India or have links with India. In spite of this, why do Nepali not like India? I think it's one of the most important questions that every policymaker in India should ask. I think unless a scholar asks this question, they cannot understand the problem, and relation between the two countries cannot be improved. Let me briefly highlight on the content. The book, which is of 250 pages, has covered all aspects, like as I said, like social, cultural, religious, economic, political, historical, people-to-people relation, different ties, and China factor. The book covers the identity and nationalism issues of Nepal, is a chapter on Maoist insurgency, what many communists call as Nepal's people movement. There are debates and discussion held during the formation of new constitution. Similarly, there are discussion on the border dispute between two countries, which many of the Indian scholars refrain from talking about. There's also issues on India-Nepal, Indo-Nepal Friendship Treaty of 1950, which almost all the communist parties and leaders have raised when they are not in power. Economic partnership between the two countries. Similarly, Indian assistance during the earthquake of 2015, and people-to-people relation between two countries, and of course, the China factor. At the end, the author has also provided some practical suggestions to the government of India and the Indian policymaker, which are practical, realistic, and achievable. I find the book significant because it comes from the ambassador who has experienced it and has raised all the contents issues frankly. It has come across many scholars. I've come across many scholars who have avoided talking about, as I said, blockade or the issues of China factor, or even about economic blockade or border issues. But Ambassador Ray has break all the boundaries, and he has placed it in detail in balanced manner. There are no unnecessary accusation and blames or one-sided perception. Though many in Nepal might have that perception before reading the book. Even me, when I started in the book, I thought that the author might try to defend several of the issues because that is what most Indian scholars and official does. But the author has addressed this, so I think it's commendable, and I really appreciate the book. Uh, Therefore, I think it's a great contribution. I think even if half of the issues I address, it will get the relation between two countries will improve drastically. Uh, Second is that in order to explore Prime Minister's question that why Nepali do not like India, he has raised he has explored the reason behind anti-India feeling, which Dr. Datta has rightly mentioned. Let me briefly point out few things that in Nepal we have anti-India feeling. There is anti-India feeling, but I think it is too mild if you compare it with anti-India feeling in Pakistan or Bangladesh and all other countries. Because most of the anti-India feeling is not directly towards India, but to the ethnicity, to Indian policies and all. I don't know how to explain, but why do people in Mumbai not like Biharis? Or how do people of Northeast look at Indians on other part? In similar reaction is of Nepalis. I don't know how to put it together, but that is not, I don't see it as an anti-Indian, but I see it in different perspective. I don't know. That is what I want to say, that it's not anti-India. We are raising certain reservation against certain policies or certain issues. Similarly, Nepali nationalism, which I call ultra-nationalism, is also built on anti-India feeling, which Ambassador has given examples of only remark on a statement like Ayodhya is in Nepal and many others. Third factor is monarchy. The evolution of Nepal nationalism, also termed Mahendra nationalism, is generated through anti-India feeling. Sometimes anti-Madhesi feeling as well. Many times Madhesis have paid price for it. In Nepal, nationalism is largely defined in terms of Pahari or hill sentiment. Like King started this intensity during 1960s to protect his own regime from the democratic forces, and later after the merger of Sikkim in India. And Ambassador has put it rightly there. And I'm amazed the way Ambassador has touched upon all the major issues in such a concise manner. Like in very short page, he has touched upon all the major aspects. Third is that Nepal has more than two-thirds, or maybe, I don't know, it might be more than that. At one point of time, it was 72% communist voters. Means almost more than two-thirds people of Nepal are aligned to one of the communist parties. And if you check if you look at their agenda, or if you look at their vote banks, they're all more of anti-India issues. Like their vote banks come from anti-India sentiments. Some are genuine, some are perceived, and some are false as well. So anti-India or anti-India sentiments is a greater vote bank in Nepal. Third is that India has always been determining force in almost all the political affairs of Nepal, almost all the political changes in Nepal, be it overthrowing Rana regime or bringing democracy or reintroduction of democracy or 7-point agreement, whatever. So when India is a major determining force, it has been a part of internal or domestic politics. Uh, though virtually it has become an important and determining force. So with this, India has always generated a kind of opposition in the country. During democratic forces, it was the king. During 7-point agreement, it was the royalist and Hindu forces. During the blockade of constitution promulgation, it was Pahadis or ultra-nationalists. It has also offended Madhesis after joining hands with Pahadis, or it has offended Nepali Congress after joining hand with Oli, or even offended Maoist at times. So it has always offended one or the other. However, India has stood with the people's aspirations. Hence, in spite of these reservations from one quarter, it has been liked by the large majority. So, uh, uh, and I also believe that though India is often accused of Indian intervention, to be very frank, almost all the political forces in Nepal has invited Indian interventions. They have benefited, they have enjoyed, and they have rejoiced, and there has always been a section who have cursed it as well. So we have all factions within that framework. What is missing in the book is the role of Indian diaspora, which is also generating anti-India feeling in Nepal. For example, many Nepalese migrants workers, they go to Gulf and they have Indian supervisors. Indian are the supervisor, engineer, or contractor. And we are all aware of the relationship between supervisor and the laborer or the worker. It's always conflicting. So when they come back home, they come with bitter experiences, which they see it as Indian mistreatment, not as a supervisor or someone in Gulf. Same is with Nepalese migrant workers when they work in Indian factories, houses, or in others. Similarly, the author talks about the poor state of Madhes, and India is one of the factors to be blamed as well, which he has refrained. Because I think with the hill elite, with the hill Brahmins, India has also rejoiced and it has tried to look at its own interest. While Indian Brahmin elite questioned Madhesi loyalty and accused the Madhesis for their special relations, India has equally benefited from them. Uh, the author has himself mentioned that during 1950, Tarai was one of the most developed, and he mentions again that Tarai is in a poor state. Now, India has been a major developing partner in Nepal since 70 years. Hence, I believe that India is also party to it. It is one of the factors among several others. Uh, I think these things have slightly changed after we had Ambassador Sam Saran as the ambassador. There are something I strongly endorse some of the issues which author has raised. For instance, the lack of adequate experts on Nepal-India relations. I mean, we all are aware how if you listen to TV debates, we can judge that how well versed people on both the side are about each other. I think in Nepal, in my 15 years, I have not even met 10 good scholars who work on Nepal-India relations.
Pramod, sorry to interrupt you. We will get back to you again in the second session. But I really am very much interested in the discussion on Nepali migrant workers, and you have raised this issue. So we will get back to Ambassador Rai on this particular point. But now I'll request Aditya to share your views on the book. Aditya?
I think he has got disconnected.
Yes. Yes, I think we can establish contact with Aditya. And meanwhile, I intend to go back to Ambassador Rai on the point that Pramod has raised, which is very, very, very crucial in nowadays. That's the issue of migrant workers, specifically Nepali workers and their Indian bosses. So, what's your opinion on the point raised by Pramod?
Two or three things. One is, the condition of Nepali migrant workers, especially in the Gulf, is not very good. And in the book, I mentioned that a former Nepalese ambassador to one of the Gulf countries told me that, they're actually working like slaves. And, when I was in Nepal, they said every day there were 2 dead bodies that were returning in coffins from the Gulf. So clearly the situation, they don't get paid very well. Their living conditions are pretty bad. And I think many of the other South Asian countries have a similar experience. So one of the things that we could think of is that, if the South Asian countries can work together to at least get better terms and conditions, for the employees in the Gulf. Second point is about Indian supervisors. See, the Indian supervisors are carrying the Indian perception of the Nepalese. If you see in Delhi or in one of the big metros, who are the Nepalese that most of the Indians interact with? most of them are in very low paid and menial jobs. So the attitude, the relationship is not very, is not very positive. And I think this perception then gets carried to, places in the Gulf as well. So I think, we need to see how these issues can be addressed, because, all these workers are doing important jobs, and one should not disparage or look down on somebody simply because there's a particular kind of job that the person is working in, or is paid less than you are. So I think these 2 points is what I would like to contribute.
I want to take a cue from your deliberation on South Asian identity. You have stated that if South Asia can work together on this particular issue, and also Dr. Shriradha has raised the point of multilateralism and not confined to the bilateral relationship only. So I would take this opportunity to ask you to know your views on the scope of multilateral cooperation, specifically in BBIN segment or BIMSTEC segment, where Nepal can play important role, and India-Nepal relationship can definitely inspire the entire multilateral platform. So what's your take on that?
So I think, if you look at what is our vision for South Asia, and, we are interconnected, we have a lot of cultural and civilizational links, but I think the focus now is that we should really add to the economic dimension of the relationship. So we should look at South Asia as an interconnected and interdependent economic space where every country has the freedom to export, import, travel to, get jobs. So I think, that really should be the kind of vision that we are looking for. So we shouldn't look at issues bilaterally only. If, for instance, there is a trilateral cooperation between Bangladesh, Nepal and India. For instance, Nepal, wants to sell electricity to Bangladesh directly. And, the transmission lines will go through India. So India should support it, not oppose it. In the past, our view was that no, Nepal should first sell to India, then India will sell to Bangladesh. Why? If we are looking at this as an interconnected economic space, we want all the countries to be, umbilically linked together economically. We should encourage cooperation between Bhutan and Bangladesh, between Nepal and Bangladesh, maybe even bring in Myanmar. So I think we have to look at these things strategically. The Kosi High Dam project, for instance, we have not succeeded bilaterally. But if the Kosi High Dam project is developed, Bangladesh as a lower riparian of the Ganga will also benefit. And for Nepal, politically, it will be easier to do an agreement within a trilateral context, because Bangladesh is also there, so they'll be much more comfortable politically, and there'll be less opposition back home. So we need to have a much broader perspective, and this broader perspective has really to come at the political level. I don't think necessarily officials working in individual ministries would be able to resolve some of these issues. But if there is a clear political direction that this is in our long-term strategic interest, this integration, we must do everything we can to support it, then I think things will start changing. Because I find that, some of our people still think in bilateral terms. No, we have to work bilaterally. Why should we do things trilaterally? So I think the regional and the multilateral or sub-regional dimension is extremely important. And, some efforts have been achieved. The motor vehicle agreement under BBIN. We are talking about common grid connectivity. So, there is progress, but I think, this is the direction which should be reinforced.
Thanks, Ambassador Rai. Now, I think we have Aditya among us. So, Aditya, it's over to you. You can share your views on the book as well as on the contemporary relations between Nepal and India. Aditya?
Sure, ma'am. Sorry for the delay and sorry for these technical glitches. It's a pleasure being a part of this panel, and it's a pleasure sharing this virtual platform alongside these esteemed scholars and practitioners. And also, Ambassador Ray, a huge congratulations for writing such a splendid book. As a lot of other panelists have also emphasized that it's very it gives a very in-depth analysis and insights of India-Nepal relations, and also it's very multidimensional and multidisciplinary in its nature, the way it looks at economics, society, nationalism, politics. So it's a amazing book, and it never felt like I'm reading something that's that's not academic. All right, it's India-Nepal relations is obviously a complex issue, and as a lot of people have emphasized, and it never felt like I'm reading a book as such. And congratulations on such a interesting book you have written. Like as all the panelists have emphasized, there's one probably interesting thing that I came across throughout the book, which that's interrelated to the second theme that I also wanted to discuss on this book, was about the anti-Indian nationalism and also narratives that happen to be within the India-Nepal relations. So the first thing was obviously about anti-Indian nationalism. We have discussed various factors. Probably one might be geography, one the cultural prominence, and then the other thing might be the how India-Nepal relations are a victim.
We lost him again. You are on mute.
Yes, we have lost him again. I think he is facing a terrible network today. I'll take the. I want to take this opportunity to raise another important. He's back. Yes, Aditya.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, so first important thing was, that we discussed, or as your book discusses, was about the anti-Nepalism. And obviously, you give multiple reasons for it. One is probably that we see Nepal being a victim of identity politics, where it just wants to distinguish itself from the broader entity of India and the culture. And then the second thing was obviously, trying to being a small state covered by India on all sides of the geography. It's one more thing that brings in this anti-India nationalism and its own space to maneuver with its independent foreign policy and politics. So that's one thing that's really interesting. But then you bring a cautionary note, which makes the book more interesting, is where you say there is a point in time where probably due to COVID or due to this ongoing hostility in India-Nepal relations, especially with the Kalapani dispute, and also with the Lipu Lake controversy, and the alleged blockade that happened to be in 2015. So these are all after the 2015 earthquake. So these are all something that really tends to bring like a threat, as you say, or a cautionary note to the broader India-Nepal relations, and also the civilisational ties, the roti beti ka rishta that we always keep on emphasizing on. So that's an interesting point that you bring, but that also brings us one more probable theme to discuss is, so how do we go from here? I mean, there's enough discussion made on anti-Indian nationalism within neighborhood, but there is very less discussion that obviously says about how do we actually get out, or how do we really root out from this anti-Indian nationalism that's been all over India's neighborhood. And I think you make a lot of excellent points and recommendations in this context, speaking about improving investments, walking the talk, improving connectivity, and aspects as such, which are quite interesting. But again, it leaves a point for us to carry ahead. What do we do next? Do we adopt? Do we adopt the same path that we are going in, emphasize on regional connectivity? I mean, there have been researches which shows anti-Americanism, for instance, in Latin America is being neutralized, or in a way being countered through everyday exchanges of economic goods. It's not just in investments, it's not just in trade, but also it's not just an investment, not also in aid, but also through everyday trade, through everyday economic interactions. It's one way that we try to, the Americans have tried to neutralize the Latin American anti-Americanism. So again, this brings us a similar topic with India, like as you emphasize on the recommendations that we need some kind of connectivity that bridges the gap between between India and Nepal. So that's one interesting point. And then the second interesting point would also be on, would this coercive diplomacy in that context work for India in any case, as there's a huge risk that it might push Nepal further away from India. And I think these are some of the interesting points to make. And but again, when it comes to soft power or using investments or economic diplomacy, there's one instance where we see, like these cannot completely fructify if the main concerns aren't targeted, and if the main issues aren't being solved within the broader India-Nepal relations. So I think that's one thing that we need to consider, and that's also related to the second theme that you bring up with the broader narratives and the role of media that also has to play an important role by bridging India-Nepal relations. So I say, as you say, there must have been some kind of guidelines to be provided to media when they were covering these earthquakes in Nepal. So I see a similar instance. Probably it's in a way we conduct our foreign policy and try to bridge the narratives through social media or media or information communication technology, trying to counter the propaganda, or rather than propaganda, counter the anti-Indian nationalism that is being affiliated to most of the projects, or the suspicions that are being affiliated to Indian investments to most of the projects. So I think that's where we need to have some kind of regulations or guidelines to build Indian narratives, or at least counter this anti-Indian nationalist narratives or suspicions about India and its investments. And I think the final conclusion I would try to conclude with this final suggestion is, as you had recommended, that there is a need to provide guidelines to media houses on how they cover. I think there's one point of debate which says about democratic, the democracy and the right to express. But again, if we have to go through Indian Constitution, there is certain limitations, and there's also a certain exemption that provides, that says the right to express cannot harm friend relations with other countries. And I think there's high time we try to build narratives through some kind of guidelines, as you suggested. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditya, for your comments. And really, when you were invisible for a brief span of time, I wanted to raise the similar point by questioning the role of media. I would like to request Ambassador Rai to say a few words and share your views on the role of media, because we know that domestic politics, foreign policy is a subset of domestic politics, and the role of media within domestic arena is always important for foreign policy making. So how do you visualize the role of media in contemporary bilateral relationship between Nepal and India? It's over to you.
The media, and especially the media, especially the Indian media, has a huge impact in Nepal. Most Indian media channels, including the news channels, the entertainment channels, are all watched eagerly in Nepal. And so when we had this boundary dispute between Nepal and India, some of the reports that the Indian media houses carried were horrible. And they had a very negative impact, on Nepalese public opinion, to the extent that some of the cable operators in Nepal stopped showing Indian television channels. And, we were treating Nepal as if it were like Pakistan or China, and making all kinds of unsubstantiated allegations. And I think this was really irresponsible. Of course, as many channels are running after TRPs, and I guess that's where you get your advertising revenue. But there has to be some semblance of objectivity in the analysis. And, so this was actually unfortunate episode. But, I think things have improved. But clearly, I think there needs to be much greater interaction, especially, say, between our, Ministry of External Affairs. And we should be holding regular background briefings for the important media houses and correspondents, explaining to them the context of the relationship between India and each of her neighbors, what India's policy is, what we are trying to achieve, what we are trying to do. So this context is necessary for every journalist to understand before, reporting. I mean, the journalist can criticize the context. He may or may not agree with you. It's a free world. We are a democracy. But at least from the government perspective, I think there needs to be much more openness and transparency in our engagement, in trying to, explain to our reporters and journalists where we are coming from, what our policy is, what we are trying to achieve, what are the problems, how does the other country look at it. I think this should play a very important role for a more objective and balanced portrayal of issues.
Anusha, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. We are at the fag end of our program, so I would request all the panelists, if you have any specific question on the book, please you can ask. So it's I will start with Sri Radha. Just within
Okay, so
1 or 2 minutes, Sri Radha.
one quick questions about the drafting of the constitution. We are aware of the fact that they didn't, I mean, as promised or whatever as discussed, the issues were not drafted in. So when it was being adopted, you talk about the fact that it was noted. I mean, very clearly giving conveying to them the displeasure or whatever you call it. I'm just saying that had we done it differently, I mean, of course, we know the subsequent, which you've explained. I'm just saying that in terms of the fact that there are close neighbors, irrespective of what they do, it's a sovereign entity, we will have to deal with them. So was it, I mean, how can we change that little bit? I'm saying for future references that, I mean, I think our displeasure was conveyed at many levels. But, to give that official tag of that it's noted and not welcome, I mean, does that again have a kind of a reflection on the way the relationship is played out?
Pramod, if you want to raise an issue.
I just want to make short comments and maybe make a comments, not questions. One that is missing in the book is the role of India in formation of Tribhuvan University or setting up of industrial towns like Biratnagar and Birganj. Whole Tribhuvan University was constructed with the support of Patna University and all, which is quite missing. I think that is one of the major issues that should have been mentioned. Second, there are three short disagreements. One is that ambassador says that Nepal would have signed BRI even if there was no blockade. I disagree on that. I think Nepal would not have, but many of the Nepalese diplomats supports what Ambassador Rai says. Second is that there is a question that if train comes from China, what will train takes back? I think, did the Chinese ask this question in 1962 when they constructed 120-kilometer road from Tatopani to Kathmandu? In 1962, what was the economic engagement between the two countries? Where was China? China had famine. It had 1962 war. It had fought with Japan. So in that time, China was not an economic power. Now China is the richest country, one of the richest countries in the world. If China did not ask that question, what will the road from Kathmandu will take to Lhasa in 1962? Even nothing is being taken at the moment. The road is defunct, but we still have that. Chinese have spent huge amounts of money in 1962 constructing that road. I think this question might not come to the Chinese mind when constructing that railway. If they can have Kodari Rajmarg from Kathmandu to border in 1962, 100 kilometers, which was a huge cost, I think train is a small cost for them to the rising China. Third is that he mentions about VK Singh, mentioned about 26 China study centers. In my PhD, I had mentioned about 11 China study centers. I had cited that from IBS website.
Be very specific, please.
Yeah,
we don't have much time.
So whenever I visit China, whenever I make presentations, they ask me where are those, and I'm not able to locate that. So I think it would be worthy if those points are made. Where are those 26 China studies? Does it exist? Because these things get cited one after another, and then it creates lots of concerns, sometimes just in the air. I'd like to end there. Thank you.
Thanks, Pramod. Aditya, very quickly.
Right, ma'am. I would just
Very
want to ask Ambassador Ray. So where do we see the future trajectory of India-Nepal relations, especially in terms of political parties? As we said, we have alienated Nepali Congress, and this anti-Indian nationalism has created a kind of ripple effect. And you, in one of your interview, claimed that Nepalese Congress has become a B team of anti-Indian nationalism. So where do we see India and Nepalese political elites engaging in the future cooperation, and how do we see this unfolding in upcoming days? Thank you.
Ambassador Rai.
Yeah, just very
there are
briefly to Aditya's
very brief.
question. I think the future lies in the economic, and we have to create vested interest in Nepal for economic cooperation with India. The Nepalese must benefit from this economic cooperation, and that is what is going to tie in the relationship. I think that should be the fundamental issue. On whether we should have noted the constitution or something else, I mean, there was a whole build-up to the situation. And you remember the context, many people had been killed. There was huge agitation going on in the Tarai. Many people had been killed. We had been urging the Nepalese political leaders to accommodate the aspirations of all communities. And, despite this, for various other reasons, they, and the manner in which the constitution was adopted, within 1 week, you approved all the articles, all the amendments were withdrawn, 3-line whips were issued to MPs to sign the constitution. So, it was all done, in a very fast-tracked manner. So I think, at that point in time, there's no way that we could have taken a view other than what we did, I think. And of course, the Nepalese were extremely upset. And, I can understand that. But, we had a lot of reservations, both in terms of the content and the process. Of course, it's a sovereign country and they can decide what they want to do. But our view was that if you don't accommodate the interests and concerns of all communities, there will not be durable stability in Nepal. And if there's no durable stability in Nepal, then India gets affected. And I want to thank Pramod for bringing out very important issues. On the China Study Centers, frankly, I did not do a calculation or listing. I simply quoted from a parliament question, a response to a parliament question, presuming that, the answer would be correct. But I think this is a very valid point, and someone should, look at this. On the Tribhuvan University, yes, I think it's a very major aspect. And, somehow we tend to forget the historical cooperation projects that have taken place between India and Nepal and focus only on the contemporary one. On the question of the BRI, I'm not so sanguine. I think the geology of the Himalayan region is so fragile, and the environmental considerations are very, very significant. Even the Kotdari-Kathmandu road that Pramod talks about is shut. And, there has been this earthquake. So I feel that, this makes good political headlines. But whether this train will come down from Tibet into Nepal, I have, a big question mark. You just have to travel to these border regions. You go to Raswagadi or to on the other Arniko highway, and you will see how difficult the geography and the geology is. And secondly, these are really big ticket items. We are talking in terms of billions of dollars. So I don't know whether, of course, China is rich. China has a lot of resources. But surely not all the development projects under BRI are simply political or strategic. There has to be some rate of return. There has to be some economic benefit as well. And I think, that is one aspect that would be included in the BRI initiatives in Nepal. And, what is the reason why many of these projects are not progressing? There has to be some reason. I mean, if the Chinese were so keen on this, they have the resources to be able to really expeditiously implement some of these projects. So just a few observations, but thank you all very much. I'm so happy and delighted that you liked the book, and as for a first-time author, this is a great feeling. Thank you.
Every good thing has its end, and we have to finish our program because of paucity of time. And I would request all our audience to read this book, and I'm sure you will enjoy it because of its anecdotal mode of narration. And on behalf of ORF, I'm grateful to all the panelists to take part in this discussion, and also we are grateful and thankful to Ambassador Rai for joining us today and for discussing various aspects on some critical issues between India and Nepal. Thank you so much for your cooperation and support. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.